Hi, it's me, your boyfriend slash girlfriend slash day friend, favorite content creator. And I've talked about this in the past when I've complained about how, capitalism ruins everything. But I don't think I've ever actually dedicated a video specifically towards this topic. So here's that video. It's been a growing trend in the AAA gaming space that once you purchase a game, you no longer own the actual game, but rather you are renting a license to play and use that game. And while in the past, that wasn't that big of an issue because we mostly had like physical discs and, optical disc drives, and we didn't need an always online connection. Sorry. That's clearly no longer been the case. Tons of games are being sold strictly through digital storefronts. And with that comes the loss of actual ownership over your games. And the reason why I am sort of doing this preamble is because there is an initiative out there called Stop Killing Games, which, much like what the title suggests, they want these companies to stop killing games, but not in the sense of, making them worse or whatever, right? It's a different argument, but rather the ability to access the game once the company has decided to no longer support the game. Now, an aspect of that would naturally include games that are an always online thing, right? And that's something that PirateSoftware seemed to hone in on specifically, but I think he was a bit myopic in his approach, because while that is a factor to the overall initiative, it is not the sole conceit of it. From my interpretation of it, and I did read the initiative for myself, it is wanting publishers, right, to not just remotely disable a game without doing any sort of thing to ensure that they've a reasonable amount of things to do in order to make sure that the game is still accessible or in a functional state. Basically, the initiative doesn't want companies to be able to just delete a game that you paid for. And I'm pretty much always on the side of the consumer, so I 100% understand that frustration. It fucking bothers me too. I don't like the fact that I can, for example, buy a game through Steam, and then because of some bullshit with the publishers and their rights, I now no longer have access to that game, right? I can boot the game up, but I cannot play it. Or hell, I can no longer purchase that game, or I can no longer have access to anything I've done surrounding the game. That fucking sucks, especially if you spend hours upon hours in the game, right? And going back to the whole PirateSoftware thing, I think I can't not mention what's happening with that. Essentially, PirateSoftware had his own interpretation of the initiative and sort of put out videos that attacked some of the people either responsible for it or the people promoting said initiative, which may have had a negative impact on the, initiative. And I will actually leave what he wrote up here so you guys can see his understanding, his explanations or whatever. And, we'll go from there. All right, this is the me who's editing this video. I'm editing it right after I recorded it. So anyways, I did in fact watch the two videos Thor linked to his post about what he talked about. And I just want have a couple of thoughts about that. Just a couple of thoughts. First video is him just kind of discussing why he's against it, right? And he brought some scenarios which even I bring up in this video that hopefully you're watching and enjoying. And I do sort of agree with that, but I also take umbrage with the fact that, again, he's being very, very myopic and only looking at this as one particular way and not offering solutions. And then I have more to say about the second video, because in the second video, he starts using examples about how, hey, if you want to be like this, and then your real issue is you guys are complaining about first video. Sorry, my brain is weird. The first video, The one part I want to talk about is his specific example is he interprets the initiative as saying that they want to be going after single player games that present as only single player and then have online and then revoke the license, right? And that's his takeaway from that, and that's his interpretation. But that is not what the initiative actually says. That is what Thor thinks the initiative should be saying. And he's going off of that. So he's effectively having a different conversation than the actual initiative is putting out. Now, for the second video, is when he starts talking about like very specific examples like, well, if you leave the servers open over, that's ripe for abuse, right? And then he also talks about how, well, people are saying that live services shouldn't exist. Like he's going from the most extreme examples to, like he says, the most reasonable one. And his most reasonable one is, people saying, well, it's not a law, it's an initiative, just wait. And his response is, I shouldn't have to wait. And he's talked about how this is his wheelhouse. He's a developer. And I think that's sort of not the problem in general, but the problem with Thor in this regard is that because he's the developer, he is only looking at it from the developer side, but not from the consumer side. He says this is his wheelhouse. He has lots of knowledge of it, but he's not offered any solutions in regards to the actual initiative. He's offered a solution to, live services, which is just say you're renting the license, which it's what Steam does, right? Again, the video that I'm referring to is a couple of months old at this point, almost a year old. So, but I think the point still stands that I think a lot of the issue happening here is his interpretation of this is very uncharitable. He assumes the absolute worst situation and that's essentially the only way things is going to go down. And shit, I'm pretty cynical, but not to that level. And I was looking at the responses in his post on Twitter, and there was developers telling him, no, bro, we've already kind of solved that. Like we've already fixed that issue. And instead of being like, oh shit, my bad, he kind of keeps doubling down, which is something he's been accused of, he's sort of a narcissist, is what people are saying, that he's narcissistic and that he doesn't take things well. This is the same thing with the OnlyFans thing, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this isn't a video to like shit on Thor, but it wouldn't be me if I didn't have at least some input on that. I do believe still, if you are a developer or, you're able to talk about this stuff, maybe do allow us to understand what's really going on. Because I will admit, as a consumer, as a player, I don't know the ins and outs of game design. I have things that I've gleaned through playing and my assumptions, and some of them I think are pretty solid, at least based in some level of reality. But yeah, I don't know what exactly it takes to make a game in a functional state. But if someone like Thor does, maybe present that in a way that people can understand it and you don't come off as an asshole. I mean, let me be real, you really do come off as an asshole. But for other developers, if that's the issue, like, hey, we're not understanding it, then put it out there. Let us understand. That's all I want to say. Now back to the video, which is also going to cover some of the shit I just said. Okay, bye. And then I will also show people's sort of response to that, because I think in between that, there is somewhat of a dialogue happening, because even if you don't like the way that PirateSoftware broached the subject, I think it was sort of brash. And I know he has a history of kind of being this, I know better than you guy, and that rubs people the wrong way, which is totally fair. I don't necessarily like that attitude either. But if I sort of take away the emotion of it and just look at what he's saying, I do also understand his point of view, right? Because there is a level of, how best to put this, there is a level of infeasibility to this. Infeasibility. That's a word, damn it. To what the request being made as written, right? Because how then do you square if I do in fact make a live service game? If I'm Concord, right? And people bought the game. I mean, not a lot, obviously, but people bought the game and they can no longer play it, right? Do they get an exemption from that because they were strictly a live service only game and now the service is done, you shouldn't be able to access it? Or are they expected to hit a switch where you can still play on their own servers? Because I also know that the initiative says they don't want to own the property, right? They don't want the rights to the IP. They don't want anything like that. They just want to be able to play the game even after they have cut off support. So I think one of the bigger issues here is, how does this work in a way that it covers pretty much all the games that it needs to cover? Because if we're talking about single player only online games, right, then that's a different issue than MMOs, which is a different issue than games that have online functionality but don't necessarily require it to be online. And I think the latter is the easiest to tackle, because you could just simply get rid of the online functionality aspect of it and then just have the game be what it is. Especially those kinds of games don't typically have a very strong online component. For example, it might be like a Dark Souls, I don't know, fucking 2, original Dark Souls 2, right? They may no longer have servers up for that, but you can still play Dark Souls 2, just can't invade anyone's game, thankfully. You also won't be able to get updates because the game's no longer being serviced. So that I understand as an easy way to do that. But I think the more online the game is, sort of the harder it would be from a developer standpoint to be able to create a game in such a way every single time that if the online functionality were to cease, people would still have access to it offline. Because then also, what does that look like? Is it simply you're playing WoW and somehow WoW is no longer being supported? Is it just you just stay on your server? Are you then going to have the ability to host WoW on your own server? Because I believe it was Insoft did it with City of Heroes, where people kept a private server running and they let them just finally have the range to do that. Yes, I also know that is not explicitly what the initiative calls for, but I'm sort of just thinking out loud, like thinking how this, would play out in reality. And I do think part of that is what PirateSoftware was going for. But I've also seen the other side of it, where it's like, hey, you're hyper focusing on this very specific example that we never stated was the core issue in play, right? And I do think, since this is just an initiative and not necessarily a law, there is a lot of wiggle room for them to, restructure their sentences in order for them to present a more feasible plan. Because at the end of the day, what we're talking about, regardless of where you fall on the language part of it, is the act of preserving video games. And I think we can all agree that is a good thing. That is a net positive. I am in support of the petition for, people not killing games. I support that. We as consumers should be able to purchase something and own it. I strongly believe that we should be able to own the things that we pay for, especially because this shit's not cheap and it's not getting cheaper. And if you compound that by games that are in fact live services and require things like, either monthly subscriptions or paying for like battle passes, even though they're optional, come on. And, you start to see the sunk cost you put in there. Yeah, it'd be nice that if I were to boot up a game that I bought 2 years ago, I could still play at a relatively functional state. Obviously, there wouldn't be any new updates, but it'd be nice to be able to just play the game. Also, and I think this is more so where the spirit of the initiative is coming from, I have always stated video games are art. And like any art, books, film, TV, music, there should be efforts to preserve what was made. No matter how you feel about a video game, no matter how you feel about the people who made it, games are art. And it's really disheartening to see a lot of games that will, unless, a company decides to remaster it, will never see the light of day again. You will never be able to access it. You can't play it anymore. You can't purchase it. You can't even see footage of it. Like, there are games out there in the ether, right, that you will never be able to play, that you'll never be able to buy. And that fucking sucks. And a lot of them get clapped because they were either online only games or had some component that was just online. So yes, we should be able to preserve games, much in the same way that, people have emulations available, right? Because there are other platforms that you also can no longer have access to or are no longer supported, which have games that only exist on that platform. I think we should be able to play that game. I think we should be able to own the games that we have purchased. It's not an insane stance to take. But again, I do understand that it's not as simple as flipping a switch and here you go, right? I do believe this would have to, effectively change how companies design games, especially games with online components. So that's a very valid concern. But I also think we could figure out a way to make it at least feasible. Maybe not for every single game, but maybe, for example, it's no longer a license. Maybe I just own the game. And maybe because of that, I can have a copy saved on my hard drive or whatever, and I can play the game from memory. And maybe it won't load anything up, it won't connect to the internet, but I can still do shit. I obviously am not a programmer or a computer person. I'm just a guy with access to the internet who plays video games. But surely people much, much, much smarter than me can figure out a way where consumers can own or have access to the products they've paid for. Because that is ultimately what I believe to be the main thrust of the initiative. If you buy the game, you should own it. And again, going back to the whole PirateSoftware thing, you don't have to like him. I honestly only knew about him previously because of Heartbound, which happened years ago. And I don't even know the stats of that game because I'm not keeping up with it particularly hard. But you don't have to like that person, right? But I also will say, maybe take some time and then go back and read what he actually wrote. And maybe there might be some kernel of truth there. Again, this isn't a video made to pick a side on PirateSoftware or Ross or whatever. I don't truly care about that. What I care about is the preservation of games. And because of that, I will be linking the petition to this video. So hopefully you guys watch this all the way through, you will go and sign a petition, or just fucking go to the section right now and sign a petition. Because at the end of the day, we at the very least need this conversation to be had. And in order to have this conversation, it does need to hit a certain amount of signatures. So that's my 2 cents on the whole stop killing video games thing, in case anyone wanted my particular 2 cents.